that, but it's something that almost every ancient civilization did. You stood a stone up to commemorate something. Could be anything. Of course, the Israelites used it as a special way to commemorate covenants, especially with Jehovah. So, today, you can see, we'll start off with Genesis 28. And it says, early the next morning, Jacob took the stone he had placed under his head, set it up as a pillar, and poured oil on the top of it. Now, when I went the first time to Israel, I had the opportunity, we had some downtime, we sang some songs, and up on the top of a ridge overlooking the Dead Sea, I had the opportunity to take some, rather large stones and build some standing stones to commemorate my wife, who was unable to come at the time. And so those standing stones were for her. But keep in mind that everything is relative. Okay? I made it look awfully big, but it wasn't more than about 12 inches tall. But it looked good. And so keep that in mind today as we go forward. And this is what we're going to talk about, is the Hebrew standing stones. Our text verse today is going to come out of Leviticus 26, verse 1. It says, "Do not make idols or set up an image or a sacred stone for yourselves, and do not place a carved stone in your land to bow down before it. I am the Lord your God." And that was given to the Israelites by Moses. And God, told Moses to tell them that. Don't do these things. So, in the opportunity to actually see standing stones. The first trip, I had no idea what a standing stone was. Never heard of a standing stone in relation to the Hebrew Bible. And so it was kind of, to me, a little bit prophetic that I did it on the first trip without really any meaning of what standing stones do mean. So we went to this place in 2020, and you can see our bus driver there. He's all excited that I took his picture. And but we went to a place, and the day that we went there, Steve, it was extremely cold. It was windy. It was drizzling. And we spent about maybe 30 minutes in a place that we should have spent probably 3 hours or 4 hours looking at all that was there. So all of this just went over my head. We looked at stuff, and I'll take some pictures of what they take pictures of. This is important, that's important. But I had no idea why it was important until we got back. And so here is the location of the standing stones that are in Israel. It is the only historical landscape item that has been found, archaeological site that has been found in Israel that has standing stones. The Bible refers to it in several different places. But up until 2011, this was the only place that had them. So, where are they? They are in a place called Harad. And Harad is at the base of what the ancient Israel, that was kind of the cutoff of their land. Everything south of that looked like this. Desert. That is the Negev desert. And so it is kind of the beginning of where Israel goes north, where things grow and they actually get a little rain, and everything south of that is desert and extremely rugged territory. It's also the area where the Israelites did most of their 40-year wandering, was down in this area. So,
but it's cold?
It was cold that day, yes. Cold, windy, and drizzly. And so it can get cold in Israel, especially in the north and up and even in Jerusalem. It can get down into the 30s in the wintertime. So really the climate is not a whole lot different than it is here. So
It's not different from what here?
it's not too much different than it is here.
But it's desert all the time over there.
No. Their difference is their extremes are close together as far as, you can drive an hour and be in snow and then drive out and in 8 hours be in a desert and be, 80 degrees and you were freezing up there. So it's really a compact area. So.
Cold. It wasn't like there was snow on the ground. It was just cold because it was rainy.
And windy.
Drizzly and windy, and that was unusual for that time of the year.
Right. So when the Canaanite king of Harod, who lived in the Negev, heard that Israel was coming along the road to Atharim, he attacked the Israelites and captured some of them. Then Israel made this vow to the Lord: if you will deliver these people into your hands, we will totally destroy their cities. Now, that was a promise that the Israelites made, and the Lord accepted, because the Lord did give them some of those Canaanite lands, but he didn't give them this one. This is the top of Harod fortress, but this place is important for a couple of different reasons. First reason is the blue shaded area you see there, which is a Canaanite city, which would have been one of the cities that they were referring to, and probably the city where King Harod lived. But there were several, the king of Harod, there were several Canaanite villages in that area. And this one was most likely not destroyed at that time by the Israelites. So that's one of the reasons why this place is so important, because it was inhabited by the Canaanites 400 years before Abraham. So the second reason, of course, is this building at the top of the Tel, which is an Israeli fortress. And this fortress was built sometime right about the time of King Saul. And because it was there as a fortress to protect any kind of invaders coming up from the south, because this was the southern border of Israel. And so this fortress was built, and then a town, of course, spread up around it, and so forth. So that is the reason why this place is so important. Here's just another version of that, and to kind of give you an idea, this place was not excavated and done any archaeological digs until 1960. So we really didn't have any information. They knew it was a Tel, they knew something was there, but they really didn't understand that there was a Canaanite city there, and then they knew that there was some type of Israeli Hebrew village there. But this was all excavated in the 60s. But kind of give you a better picture, sorry about that, that entire area, it's over 100-acre site today. And so it's quite large and would have been a pretty good size dwelling city at that time, both when the Canaanites lived there and when the Israelites occupied that site. This is during the excavation. This is during the excavation in the 60s, but this is the fortress that was excavated and is what we went and saw that day. Now, you look at this and you think that's not very large, but these columns right here are about 20 feet tall. So this is a big place. It's not a little, 3-room dwelling. It is large. So here's some of the things that they uncovered. One of the things that they uncovered was a temple. Now, why is that important? How many temples were there for the Jews? How many temples were there supposed to be? There was supposed to be one. But the Jews decided that, it's a little inconvenient to go all the way to Jerusalem to do our sacrifices. So over the years, they began other areas, other temples, other holy places So that they didn't have to go all the way to Jerusalem to do these sacrifices and pray at the temple and do all of those things. It's much easier to do it locally, even though God was very specific about having one tabernacle, and when the tabernacle was gone, having one temple. And you were supposed to go to that temple at certain times. But the Hebrews decided that was too much trouble. Of course, you wonder today, is it going to be too much trouble for us today to go to a church and worship? Or is it going to be easier to flick on our computer or our TV and just watch from there? Luckily, we are under a new covenant. And we are not obligated. We are not told specifically that we need to gather. He said it is good to gather, but we're not going to be held accountable if we worship somewhere else besides a designated area. So it's great to be under a new covenant. So you can see there, that's what that looks like. Now, just some reminders of what God said. And how did they know to put a temple there? If it was built at the time of Saul or King David, how did they know to put a temple there? It says, then David gave his son Solomon the plans for a portico of the temple, its buildings, its storerooms, its upper parts, its inner rooms, and the place for atonement. So they could have known how they needed to arrange this even at the time of David. And there's some speculation of when this was all built. But to give you an idea of the temple itself, to kind of break this down a little bit, this area right there, that is the altar. That's the sacrificial altar where they would actually place animals or grain and made those sacrifices to the Lord. This area here, they're not exactly sure what that is, but they're pretty sure it is a place where they would store the holy grains or keep the animals until it was time for that animal to be slaughtered. It's kind of a holding place, a holding area. Then you have the holy area that's just outside of what is called, and we hear quite often, the Holy of Holies, the inner sanctum. And that's what that green area is. Now, during the time of the kings, things began to get out of hand. And here's what we know. It says, Judah did evil in the eyes of the Lord. By the sins they committed, they stirred up his jealous anger more than those who were before them had ever done. They also set up for themselves high places, sacred stones, Asherah poles on every high hill and under every spreading tree. So Judah had made this a common occurrence. And if you think back, there are numerous times that God was very specific. In Exodus, he told the Israelites, do not make any idols. One sentence. Pretty clear, isn't it? Leviticus says, do not turn to idols or make metal gods for yourselves. I am the Lord your God. Now, in Exodus 34, the very first verse says this. It says, do not make idols or set up an image or a sacred stone for yourselves. And do not place a carved stone in your land to bow down before it. I am the Lord your God. And so he has commanded this. Now, this is important because they took that word, carved stone, and they said, well, we can't put up a carved stone because think of Egypt and the Mesopotamians, they would carve stones and they would worship those. Those were their gods. Israel says, oh, well, we'll put some stones up, but we just won't carve them. We'll go find a naturally pretty stone and we'll take that and we'll stand it up. And see, we didn't carve any stones, Lord. So we're okay. We're going to worship this stone.
So in other words, they do what we do. We put it in our own way that we want to put it.
That's exactly right. How can we bend it? How can we shape what the Lord has told us so that we can feel like we're getting away with it? Nothing has changed. So, here's a picture. I've got two side-by-side pictures. Here's a picture that I took on March when we were there. And this is a picture, I think, sometime around 1970, right at the end of the excavation period. And I want you to look at those two pictures. Other than the difference in the color of the stones, it was just because we had no sunlight that day. But if you look at that, they look a little bit different. But this is the inner sanctum. This is the Holy of Holies. And to give you an idea of what is there, those green objects are incense holders. This is where they would when they went into the Holy of Holies. And that's what they did at the temple. They had an incense holder. And so that's what they did there. Notice they have two of them there. And then, if you look, there are two standing stones. Two. Which, that's the way they found this. Now, this area was extremely pristine. And they really couldn't figure out why for quite some time. And some archaeologists have come up with some reasonings, and we'll go over that in just a moment. But look at those two stones, because in 2020, when I took this picture, look at the stone. How many stones are there now? One stone. Now, if you look at these two stones over here, this stone, and it may be kind of hard to tell, but that stone doesn't look like it is shaped, molded, anything's done to it. They just set it up. What about this stone? Does it look like it's been touched up a little? Yes, it has. It has been carved. It has been something done to it. But this stone has not. So, here's where we go from there. Maybe. This is the standing stone to Yahweh. They stood it up and did nothing to it. So there's a place we can worship. This is the standing stone to Asherah. Because Asherah was a god of the Canaanites. Specifically, the Canaanite god for worshiping sexual gratification, for what's the word I'm trying to look for here? Being virile, being able to, you would worship that God when you're wanting to have children and all of that kind of thing. So that's what the stone of Asherah was. But that's a Canaanite god. Now, here we are in the Holy of Holies. And what did God say? What did we read in the verse? Do not put any other idol next to me. Now, they did it in the Holy of Holies. But he said, next to me, wherever you are, not just in the Holy of Holies, don't put another God next to me. Now, these stones in Hebrew are called mazavah, stones. And these stones are placed, now this is the Asherah stone. Oh, let me back up and just say, in 2020 I took this picture, there's only one stone there. What stone is it? The Asherah stone. The incense tables, the incense burners, and the stones are not original. Okay? They may be in this picture when they first excavated it, but they took those out and now they are in museums in Jerusalem. So these are replicas. But they decided to just put one stone back. And to me it was kind of amazing that you picked the replica of the Asherah stone and not the stone of Jehovah. But they did this because they didn't want to cause any controversy. They wanted this to be easier to explain to people. That it was a Holy of Holies and we just had one God. But couldn't you at least pick the Jehovah stone? So anyway, all of these things, I just thought that was extremely interesting that was that way. Now, at the bottom, this area that you see here in pink, that is a raised area. Yes. I would just say probably the Israeli Antiquities Authority, who's over all of that kind of thing. And you have to remember, a lot of those people are kind of naysayers of the Hebrew history. They've said for years that, King David never existed, that, it's just strange that they fight among themselves that, they really didn't have a history, and then we're getting all this proof that they did exactly what the Bible is saying. Because you think about it, yeah.
We don't want to have no controversy.
That's
So we sort of, okay, begin to let them have their God too.
yeah,
Just stand up.
yeah. Let's just all get along.
Yeah, you're right.
We'll just do everything. So, but this raised area is called a Bama, not an Obama, just a Bama. Okay. It is a Bama, but that was typical of having. It is a raised area, but here's something that was in Exodus that God told Moses. And the Lord said to Moses, "Tell the Israelites this: you have seen for yourselves that I have spoken to you from heaven. Do not make any gods to be alongside me. Do not make for yourselves gods of silver and gold. Make an altar of earth for me, and sacrifice on it your burnt offerings and fellowship offerings, your sheep, your goats, and your cattle. Wherever I cause my name to be honored, I will come to you and bless you in the tabernacle and in the temple." Judah had caused God to show up in a lot of different places. He was a busy man then, when he was only supposed to show up in one. "If you make an altar of stones for me, do not build it with dressed stones, for you will defile it when you use a tool on it. And do not go up to my altar on steps, or your private parts may be exposed." You think about all of the other altars in God, especially in Egypt, Mesopotamia, you walk steps. There were steps so that the statue or whatever the carved image was would be up on a pedestal, and you would have to walk up to it. But God says, no steps. So if you don't do steps, you can do one step. It's as long as you don't do multiple steps. But that's the way they took it. So at least they had Jehovah a little higher than Asherah. So, next thing that happened, we had King Josiah. And we hear about King Josiah in 2 Kings, and you can see from that picture, what are they doing? They're tearing things down. Josiah, at that time, he had the temple being refurbished. And when they were refurbishing the temple, they happened to find the 5 books of Moses. Nobody even knew where they were there. Nobody had been reading the 5 books of Moses. And so they read it. And Josiah said, hey, we got to follow what this says in here. And so he began destroying all of these holy sites. Josiah brought all the priests from the towns of Judah and desecrated the high places from Geba to Beersheba, where the priests had burned incense. He broke down the gateway at the entrance of the gate of Joshua, the city governor, which was on the left side of the city gate. So he destroyed a monument or some type of a worship area that was coming into the city gate of Jerusalem. He desecrated Topheth, which was in the valley of Ben Hinnom, so no one could use it to sacrifice their son or daughter in the fire of Molech. It had gotten so bad, the Jews, the Hebrews, were literally burning their children on the altars, because that's what the Canaanites did. He removed from the entrance to the temple of the Lord the horses that the kings of Judah had dedicated to the sun. At the entrance of the temple, they had put statues of horses and said, these are to worship the sun god. They were in the court near the room of an official named Netan-Melech. Josiah then burned the chariots that were dedicated to the sun. Now I put this in there because it has the word of a man named Netanmelech. Just last year, March 31st, they announced they found a 2,600-year-old seal, those little clay seals that they would put on documents to preserve those documents to make sure just the person who it was sent to would open them. They found a clay seal bearing this inscription, Netanmelech, servant of the king. That's pretty darn good evidence that this story is true. This is the only place that Netanmelech's name shows up in the Bible, is this one verse. 2 Kings 23 goes on. It says, the king also desecrated the high places that were east of Jerusalem on the south of the hill of corruption. The ones, listen to this, the ones Solomon, king of Israel, had built for Ashtoreth, the vile goddess of the Sidonians. Even as wise as King Solomon was, we know that King Solomon put up idols in places of worship because of the wives that he married. They wanted them, he built them for them. Josiah smashed the sacred stones and cut down the Asherah poles and covered the sites with human bones. Neither before nor after Josiah has there been a king like him who turned to the Lord as he did, with all of his heart, with all of his soul, and with all of his strength, in accordance with all the laws of Moses. Now, to give you an idea, we know the Harod fortress was built sometime around King David or Saul. And then there's controversy. Was the temple added later when the temple was being built? But now there's discussion that that may not have been the case, along with the fortress itself. But how could the fortress that was built before the temple was built in Jerusalem have a temple built? Did they match the temple that was built in Harod? How did they know? But it could have been because of the plans that were already drawn, or it could have been something else. Now, we said that this was in pristine condition. And why have they not found any other sites in Israel, archaeological sites to date, that would match anything like this? Because Josiah destroyed them all. They're not there, except this one. Now, this was on the outskirts of the bottom of Israel. And what they've speculated, because of how they dug this out, or were able to dig this out, this whole area, this whole temple area, was filled with coarse sand. They were asked to destroy that temple. They didn't want to do that. So they just filled it in so it couldn't be used anymore. See, King, we got rid of it. It's no longer there because we filled it in. For whose benefit? Their benefit? For our benefit? That we're able to see it now? I don't know. But the bottom line is, this one was not destroyed. It was intentionally filled in to preserve it for a later date, or they just felt like they couldn't destroy this one, but they could destroy the rest of them. So the temples were destroyed. You have to remember that from the time that these temples were started up to the point Josiah torn those things down, that was more than 300 years. We're talking 300 years plus, maybe 10 to 12 generations of people living this way. And here you've got a king that's totally wiping out this way of life. That's a pretty big change, folks. When you've been doing something for 300, your grandmom, your great-grandmom, your great-granddad, your great-great-great-great-great-granddad was doing the same thing you were doing, and now you're being asked to change. Yes, it is. While Josiah was king, Pharaoh Necho, king of Egypt, went up to the Euphrates River to help the king of Assyria. King Josiah marched out to meet him in battle, but Necho faced him and killed him at Megiddo. Now I put this in there because I thought, here's a man, a king, who did all of these great things and had a great fervor for God. But yet he made a mistake. It tells us in God's word in 2 Kings 23 that this king from Pharaoh went and had a battle with the Mesopotamians on the other side. So he kind of had to travel through Israel to get and go after these kings in Mesopotamia. But when he came back through, after he destroyed them, he came back through, and Josiah, for some reason, was jealous of him or just decided, hey, I don't want you coming through my land again. And so he goes out to battle with him. And even the king says to him, why do you want to battle with me? I don't have anything against you. We just need to go home. But Josiah, for some reason, decided that he wanted to battle this king, and he dressed up in disguise to look like he wasn't a king to go out and fight, and yet he died in battle. I think one of the things that this shows us, regardless of how good we think we can be, or regardless of all of the great acts that we think we can do, we can still mess up in the end. God said, every one of us have sinned. I don't care how good you've been at one point. You can make a mistake. And if it's not for Jesus Christ and the grace of God through his blood, one little mistake separates us. Now, I want to change directions for just a moment. And I thought about this because I had to rechange this whole thing up over the last 2 days. Tammy will tell you I was kind of frustrated over the last 2 days. But here's where we're going. We're going to go back to 1 Kings. In 1 Kings 13, 1 through 3, it says this: by the word of the Lord, a man of God came from Judah to Bethel. Now, this is in the early days, just after King Solomon had died, and the kingdoms have split into Judah and to Israel. And so you had two different kings. But this man of God from Judah went to Bethel, which was in Israel, the country of Israel, as Jeroboam was standing by the altar to make an offering. What's wrong there? Was Jeroboam in Jerusalem at the temple? No, he was in Bethel at a temple there. Of course, Jeroboam was not a very good king. By the word of the Lord, he cried out against the altar. Altar, altar. This is what the Lord says. Now, this is the prophet speaking. A son named Josiah will be born to the house of David. On you he will sacrifice the priests of the high places who make offerings here, and human bones will be burned on you. That same day the man of God gave a sign. This is the sign of the Lord has declared. The altar will be split apart, and the ashes on it will be poured out. See, that was fulfilled 300 years later. This prophet spoke to Jeroboam in and around 920 BC. But Josiah did all these things around 620 BC, 300 years later. The things that the prophet said came true. Now, back to Josiah's time. Josiah's out destroying all of these altars, tearing down the Asherah poles, breaking the stones, destroying anything that was not in Jehovah's word. So he says, even the altar of Bethel, Jeroboam's altar, 300 years later in Bethel, the high place made by Jeroboam, son of Nebat, who had caused Israel to sin, even that altar, the high place he demolished. He burned the high place and ground it into powder and burned the Asherah pole also. The prophecy came true. Then Josiah looked around, and when he saw the tombs that were there on the hillside, he had those bones dug up, removed, and burned those on the altar. to defile it, in accordance with the word of the Lord, had proclaimed by the man of the God who was the prophet who spoke to Jeroboam. He did those things. And the king asked, well, what is that sign over there? What is that stone I see? Well, the people of the city said, well, it marks the tomb of the man of God who came from Judah and pronounced against the altar of Bethel the very things you have done to it. Josiah said, leave it alone. Don't let his bones. So they spared his bones and those of the prophet who had come from Samaria. In yesterday's paper, I saw this, and it made me redo this whole thing. I'm sorry, this was in Friday's paper. Shrines to Confederates toppled. When I saw this word shrines, I thought, man, that's a pretty strong word. It didn't say monument. They used the word shrines. Very strong word. Now, it says down here, it says, a crowd cheered and police looked on as the monument installed by a Confederate heritage group in 1907 was towed away. There were no immediate reports of any arrests. Now, when I saw shrines, I said, well, maybe I'm thinking these shrines are a little bit more important than what they really are. So I looked it up. It's a case, it's a box, it's a receptacle. It's something, one in which sacred relics such as bones are deposited, a place in which devotion is paid to a saint or a deity, a niche containing a religious image, a receptacle of the dead, a place that is hallowed by associations. Now, I think shrine was a little strong word. I don't see people going over there and praying, worshiping that. I don't think people did that. I don't think we do that today. But it brought me to this. Anybody know what that is? Now, I'm going to show my ignorance right here. I had no idea about this place. Didn't know it existed. It is in Georgia. What is it called? Anybody know? Called Stone Mountain. It is the largest granite outcropping in the world of one single huge piece of granite. It is 3 leaders of the Confederacy on horseback: President Jefferson Davis, General Robert E. Lee, and General Thomas Stonewall Jackson. Their likenesses are carved onto the side of Stone Mountain. Now, so I looked up to their website, and this is how their website starts. The best things to do in Atlanta are at Stone Mountain Park. It is a recreational area owned, I believe, by the city of Atlanta or the state of Georgia. But it's got all kinds of things you can do there. It's an amusement park. They have a list of all kinds of things you can do there. On the very first page, it just goes on and on and on. It never shows this. This monument that's carved into this mountain is huge. This mountain from base to top is like 800 feet of solid granite. But it's huge. This was the concept for this memorial, this carving, was started in 1914. It changed hands, they changed it, they changed how it was supposed to look. The guy who did Mount Rushmore started this and then had a disagreement with the people who were in charge of it. So he went on to go do Mount Rushmore, and some more people took this over. It was not completed until 1972. So, how the U.S. got so many Confederate monuments? There's over 700 Confederate monuments in the United States. Now, one thing that I found interesting is a lot of these monuments that showed up in the first 5 years from 1865 to 1870, were monuments to an individual who had died, and it was in a cemetery. They put a little monument or a stone up or something to commemorate the death of a loved one, somebody that was important to them. But then they started in the 1890s doing Confederate type displays. I don't think it was to honor an individual. It became about honoring the Confederate Revolution. Different purpose. Now, King Josiah destroyed a lot of the altars and the monuments and the sacred stones, but he chose not to do one of the stones. How do you choose? That's what we're talking about today. Which monuments are we going to take down? Which ones are we going to leave up? How do you decide? How do you decide? Well, God was pretty clear in the Old Testament, wasn't he? Don't do any of them, because it's going to cause controversy. I don't think we can go back now. But we know this. Jesus Christ tells us this in John 14. He says, "If you love me, keep my commands, and to remember me, I will ask the Father, and he will give you a carved rock? Will he give you a bronze statue? Will he give you a detailed emblem to wear? Will he give you a cathedral? Maybe a silver ingot? Or how about a colorful tattoo? Maybe a radiant necklace? Or perhaps a rubber bracelet? Maybe a flying flag? Or how about a 10-foot wooden cross?" No, Jesus did not say, "You need objects to remind you of me." This is what he said. "If you love me, keep my commands, and I will ask the Father, and he will give you another advocate to keep you and be with you forever, the Spirit of truth. The world cannot accept him, but because it neither sees him nor knows him, but you know him, for he lives with you and will be in you." We don't need any objects. We don't need any eye candy. We put it up for our benefit to maybe show others how we feel, so we don't have to show it. We can just wear it. See, I'm a Christian. But we don't need it. God from the very beginning said, don't put up stones. Don't put up metal. Don't put up anything. Because all it's going to do is cause somebody else. If it's not you, it's going to cause somebody else to say, "I need to worship that because it's pretty. It must be real. It must represent something." From the very beginning, God said, don't do it. We can't go back now. There's too many objects out there. There's too many things that we've put up. There's too many things that we've built. There's only one person that's going to destroy them all. That's Jesus Christ. He will destroy them all. And we won't need them. But when I saw this monument up there, I thought, because I don't really care if the monuments come down or not. Do you? I mean, it's just not a big deal to me. If you want to take down the Confederate monuments, that's okay. But when do you stop?
Where do you draw the line?
Where do you draw the line? I mean, are you going to take down President Lincoln? Lincoln said that blacks are not as good as whites. He was racist. He just didn't think they should be slaves. We need to take his monument down because he thought he was better than another race of people. I mean, we could go on and on with this. I mean, Muslims take over a country and they intentionally destroy anything that is not of Allah. Christian, Hebrew, it doesn't matter. The Crusaders came into Jerusalem and destroyed the old Hebrew things. See, it causes nothing but controversy. It did in Josiah's time. It did all those times. Next week, we will have part 2 of Standing Stones. This is not all, folks. There is more. Is it the second temple? Is it the first temple? Maybe it's the tabernacle. Maybe it's Temple 0. Come next week and find out.